Protection Agency.
Julian's the techie.
We'll try.
We'll try? Yeah, I should. Just to be fair. Hi, everyone. I guess Julian's putting up some slides that we put together. I want to thank everyone for inviting me down. As you may know, my home is not too far. I live right down Allens Avenue as it goes into Narragansett Boulevard down in Ejlri. So I've been traveling up and down Allens Avenue since 1987 to get to work. Save the Bay used to be up on Smith Hill, and we used to drive up and down Allens Avenue. I remember a different Allens Avenue then. It was so potholed it destroyed my car. It's a real mess. And it has changed, and I want to talk a little bit about that personally. Back in the day when I used to run Save the Bay, I was the executive director there, we did some advocacy around the facilities on Allens Avenue. I think Julian did a great job describing what they are. Back then, the wastewater plant was not what it is today, something you almost never smell. Back then, you smelled it all the time. It was a completely failing system, failing plant. At the same time, not too long after that, there was a proposal to put an 80-ton incinerator, sludge incinerator on Fields Point, and that was something we didn't think was a good idea, working for Save the Bay, and we worked with DARE on that, and we were able to defeat that. And then, of course, many years ago, I can't remember the exact year, there was a proposal at one point to turn Fields Point into a different kind of use. And the LNG tank was an issue back then, and we worked on that also. So my time and experience at Fields Point is quite deep. When I was executive director of Save the Bay, we developed the Save the Bay Center, which is right next to the Univar facility that Julian pointed out, not too far from the propane tank that was pointed out. So we're very familiar with that. I also am familiar with some of what's changed. After 9/11, there was a whole change in orientation regarding port security. You used to be able to get into the port either way. Now there's a fairly tight security arrangement. And indeed, there was worry. The Department of Homeland Security, which is federal, called me up and spoke about what we need to be worried about, given that we had eyes and ears on Fields Point, working down at the end of Fields Point at Save the Bay. So my personal connection to the area is quite deep. The other big expense down there was the construction of the combined sewer tunnel, which, if you don't know, there's a tunnel that's about 30 feet in diameter, maybe even bigger, that runs under Fields Point all the way up to the Providence Place Mall. It's about 200 feet down in bedrock, and it stores much of the combined sewer runoff, the raw sewage that's mixed with stormwater that comes out of Providence is now stored underground instead of being discharged into the Providence River. So over the years, there's been marked improvement in what is happening at Fields Point overall. That's not to diminish any of the concerns or issues that exist today. We're about progress. So I just want to emphasize that going back to the late 80s, there's been great progress, especially in the water pollution area relative to Fields Point. Now, Julian pointed out, EPA has a strong commitment to environmental justice. The development of the EJ mapping tool is that example. I want to tell you, though, that before that was actually created on a national level, EPA Region 1 had its own mapping tool that's been guiding a lot of our work for over 20 years. In fact, EPA Region 1, EPA New England, which is located in Boston, actually did a whole EJ strategy built on the President Clinton's executive order way back in the 90s. So the commitment is longstanding, it's strategic. We're trying to do all we can within our authorities and our ability under law to address EJ issues. That starts, I think, with a lot of what we do in the area of air permitting. So why don't we go to the next slide and talk a little bit about air permitting. I talked about the tool, and I want to talk a little bit about what was raised at the end, the issue, the need for resilience and adaptation planning. To talk a little bit about EJ Screen. It was developed as a national tool. What is important to us now, and I want to add emphasis, is that it's open to you, and it has been open to you, to continue to look at these issues as it goes forward. It's a tool that we will continue to build and develop and put more data into as we can. The issue of demographic indicators is vital, so you know what you're talking about as you overlay these risks on top. We were very pleased to see it in the report about Fields Point. That's exactly what we wanted in EPA. We wanted people to become self-empowered, build capability to be able to deal with issues at their level, at the community level. So we're very excited that you chose to use that tool and to begin to learn more about the issues you have in mind. So moving forward, go on the slide. I want to talk a little bit about air and the issues you have. I know Barbara covered some of this, but I asked my staff to at least give you an understanding of how air is monitored in Rhode Island, because indeed it's these air risks that perhaps are the most, potentially the most, not the most, potentially the most concern when it comes to risks we see in EJ communities such as asthma and the like. So what I thought was important, and I think Barbara talked about this, so I'm going to go quickly, was the Prairie Avenue site, and that it is one of the most capable air monitors in the region. I think you need to know that Rhode Island has one of the strongest air toxics programs in the country. It's been an emphasis in Rhode Island for a long time, and the fact that this monitor is there, that they understand much of what's going on with these toxics, air toxics, is important. Next slide. Here are trends. I think Barbara showed some of the trends. Understanding that in cities like Providence, it's not just local sources, you also have national or larger sources that are regional. The ozone is a good example. When there are issues, bad ozone days that get exacerbated by local sources like VOC emissions, volatile organic compound emissions, emissions from mobile sources, Barbara talked about those. If you have a bad day, that is, the wind's blowing from the southwest, it's about 85 degrees, moving up to 95. We're pulling air pollutants from the greater metropolitan areas to the southwest, namely Connecticut and New York. You're also getting air transport from power plants and the like in the Midwest, moving west to east. So all of these things combine to create issues. And when you think about Fields Point, or you think about anywhere in Providence, really, perhaps excepting higher places, but certainly lower places, you will have air issues. There's just no doubt about it. You can find those out. It's reported on the news every morning. Rhode Island DEM publicizes the issues of the air pollution days and their concern. But the good news is these problems are getting better. Yes? Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, I apologize. So the good news, as you can see, it is getting better. All those downward sloping graphs, the message is we're getting better. And we hope to get even more better, to brutalize the language, to get better around these issues, because we're continuing to work on these things at a national level. We have a new ozone standard that's going to be coming out fairly shortly, a new national ozone standard, which will drive more pollution reductions. We have the mercury and air toxics rule, so pollutants like mercury moving across the country, that's going to go final. Each one of these issues has been a tremendous court case and a big fight, but these fights are settling in our favor, and we look to be bringing these to final before the president leaves office. And then finally, you all know about the climate action plan the president's put forth. The Clean Power Plan, when it's finally settled, will continue to drive the what are called the normal air pollutants that we all think about that move across the country. Those will continue to be driven down. What is encouraging, of course, and I think Barbara spoke to it, is PM 2.5 and benzene, as measured at the Prairie Avenue site, is going down. So there's some good news about what a lot of work has been going on. If you could go to the next slide. That slide, as I think Julian communicated pretty well, but perhaps in even more detail, this communicates what the air sources are, the permitted air sources on Fields Point. Number 6, number 11, number 12, number 9, and 19 are looked at as what we call major sources, meaning they need what's called a Title V permit. I can't give you all the Clean Air Act deep dive on this, but essentially they're considered major sources. What's really important about major sources is these sources are visited by regulators, by people who work for me or work for Janet Coit, the director of Rhode Island DEM, to make sure that they're complying with the air pollution law that they respectively have to do, their permit, essentially. So these are all regulated sources in Fields Point. I think it's important to note that over the years, there's been great upgrades to these sources. So a good example, if you look north up at Dominion, which is the Manchester Street power plant that's just north of the hurricane barrier. It's a beautiful building. That repowering project reduced air pollution by, well, sulfur dioxide, for example, was reduced by 95%. So we've seen reductions over the years with some new technology that's been put in place. Other sources to reduce ozone continue to work as we reduce VOCs in the area. Gasoline storage, regulations have been put in place to reduce NOx, or what's called nitrogen oxide emissions. These have all been reduced. We have over 150 different industries aimed at reducing toxic emissions. So we're looking at industries as groups trying to drive down their emissions. One of these standards is to control emissions from gasoline distributors like Motiva. They've been asked to reduce their emissions. Motiva is now required to operate control equipment that is the best you can put in, what we call most achievable for that industry. So to understand how EPA approaches this, we look at what is doable at the highest, best use in an industry. So we would try to create a standard driven by a technology that works well and everybody can then put in place. And as I said, these facilities are visited, they are regulated, and we watch them carefully. One area that we need to be aware of is what enforcement is about. EPA has looked at Allens Avenue as an enforcement area. We do our own EJ screen, and we look at cumulative risk issues, and then we focus and target enforcement around that. So for example, we've done a lot of visits on firms in the area. We're concerned about scrap metal processing. We're concerned about surface coating. We're concerned about asphalt and residual oil distribution. We visited the scrap yards. We visited Promet Marine when it was there. We visited Sims. We visited Rhode Island Recycled Metals, Schnitzler, Motiva, Sprague, Exxon. We are visiting these places to ensure they're complying. And I think what Barbara spoke to is this level of regulatory interest has been something we've actually pushed pretty hard. I can tell you there's been some enforcement cases that are notable. The Northland environmental settlement. Northland, I think it's got a new name on the front of it now. I just drove by it tonight, called Sterico, I think it's called. But Northland was a hazardous waste recycler. It's about, well, it's just up from the exit 18 ramp, about 2 doors up on the left, right after one of the strip clubs. I don't know which one that is. Next to the airplane diner, basically. So Northland had an issue with whether it was complying with the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. So we brought a case against them, and typically firms like that would settle. So in this settlement, they paid a $58,000 fine, and they paid for $252,000 worth of chemical cleanups in schools within 50 miles of the facility. So then we use that money to go into schools and get chemicals out of schools that are there stuck in closets because chemistry teachers don't know what to do with all their chemicals over several decades. So literally we had to go in, bring all the chemicals out, and properly dispose of them. So that was an important case. There was another case with Promet Marine, which is now where Sims is. Again, that case was about how they were spraying and trying to strip boats and their painting facilities. I think that was in the neighborhood of a $400,000 case. I am told there are continuing investigations down on the Fields Point area. I am not told the detail about those for a very specific reason. When we do enforcement, only the enforcement people know what they're doing, and in terms of sharing that with me. I'm a political appointee. It would be inappropriate for essentially enforcers to be sharing all their information as they go along. Sometimes they make a case, sometimes they don't. When they do make a case, they bring it forward. It is usually something the Department of Justice picks up, and then there's a heavy negotiation, lawyers are hired, and we go from there. So that's how we work in the area. We worry about air emissions, we enforce our rules. There are water rules too. We occasionally do water enforcement. We haven't done a lot of it on Fields Point. Oh, that's not true. We did do a sanitary sewer overflow, SSO cases. This involved cases where residents had connected their sewer to the storm pipe. So the raw sewage was running potentially in sewer, in stormwater, and outfalls off of Fields Point. But the good news is so much has been done to reduce sewage overflow into the Providence River and into the neighborhoods. A tremendous amount of work has been done. The whole story of what's gone on at the Providence wastewater plant is a pretty incredible story over the last 20 years. So that sort of covers our base level. If you go to the next slide, here are some opportunities. Now, Barbara talked about mobile emissions as being very important. And this study that Rhode Island won was highly competitive. It was an exceptionally well done grant that got them that near road study that you already heard about. There are other monies that are available to deal with diesel emissions out of ports. One is the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, I'll call it DERA. The last couple of years, Rhode Island hasn't received these monies. I'm pleased to tell you they are going to get their $250,000 grant to do other grants to reduce diesel emissions. Without speaking about the Port of Providence, I can tell you Massport, where we do a lot of work up in Boston, they've gone through processes where they've replaced diesel engines with electric plug-ins so you don't have to run trucks or idle trucks. They've replaced dirty diesel on top of cranes with cleaner diesel engines. A lot of different efforts have gone forth. Usually what we do is we use these monies to help them discount the replacing of dirty diesel with cleaner engines or with cleaner or ways to reduce emissions from trucks and trains and the like. There's also a competitive process, which we had a request for proposal in February. We're looking for applications until April, which gives us another opportunity to give out more money. We'll have approximately $1.6 million available to compete for to try to deal with diesel emissions in areas like ports. And as I said, we have funded other areas in the region. New Bedford, the Port of New Bedford's gotten money. Massport's gotten money. Massport's got a lot of money. We've been able to fund things in Chelsea, in the Chelsea port. So it's an opportunity for everybody to look at going forward. Next slide, please. Now, what I want to bring to you also is the opportunity. Now, EPA and Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, we do our best with our regulatory programs, and as I said, we're very attentive to the sources in EJ communities. And as I said, we're pursuing enforcement rigorously in communities all over New England, including this area. But that may not be everything. and Barbara was talking a little bit about some handheld air monitors. We're very interested in understanding how we can learn more about local air pollution sources. And the good news is there's a lot of new technology, air monitoring technology, that's very affordable that can be used in local areas. That little blue thing up there is an air monitor that you can buy for about $300–400. Now that's a lot of money, but compared to the sampling monitoring stations we put up, like the one on Prairie Avenue, that's many thousands of dollars. So for reasonable dollars, we can start to put together air monitors that can perhaps help understand local issues better. I have one caution. If you launch a citizen science effort around these things, you need to know that some of the products out there aren't worth the $1. They're literally random samplers, if you will. The other point is you need to understand you need to catch air pollution over time. Nobody regulates air pollution for 1 day or 1 hour. We tend to keep it over time. So getting advice on how to set up a good citizen science effort on air pollution is something you need, and we can help you with that through our resources at EPA. In fact, I think we have invited the Justice League up to a meeting, or you will be getting an invitation to a meeting. It's kind of a select meeting of 100 or so groups to meet up in Boston to talk about citizen science opportunities. What we want to do is create a network so groups can learn from each other. So a group that might be doing great work in Springfield or great work in Bridgeport can connect and help everybody do these efforts. One idea we're pursuing is what we call the Village Green. We built a park bench that can be a local air monitor. There's one in Hartford that I'm going to go over to in a couple days to see it operate. And it literally brings air quality from that park bench, that local area, right up onto the web so people can see how the air is in their local neighborhood. Now, I want to make sure air pollution is very dependent on weather. So if you only went for the day that the weather's bad or it's a bad air day, you won't get a true sense of the real risk. You have to be clear on that. Finally, when it comes to the air issue, more is coming on mobile sources from the federal government. We have new, what we call Tier 3 standards. Cars are going to continue to get cleaner. There's mandates on the cars from now driving up through, I don't remember the year, but they're going to continue to get cleaner. The other thing that's coming is rules on heavy-duty trucks. If you drive down Allen's Avenue like I do early in the morning, you will see gasoline trucks all parked there idling, getting ready to go in and getting their load to wherever they go. Our new rules on trucks will, as those trucks wear out, new trucks will come in, new trucks will be cleaner. Now, the only issue with that is if you know anything about trucks, they last a long time. So this isn't going to be the immediate fix, but the bottom line is we are promulgating rules that will clean up heavy-duty sources, such as trucks. And finally, Rhode Island has some very strong anti-idling rules. These are opportunities for you to look at how you might reduce idling. And then finally, there's two other mobile sources I just want to mention. You have a lot of trains coming into the port. You are a big recipient of ethanol export here. It was headed to Chelsea. I can tell a story of why it's not going to Chelsea. It is coming here. There's safety precautions taken with ethanol. It is a fairly explosive product. But the bottom line is these trains do come in. They are a source. Of course, when the ship comes in to bring the product into Narragansett Improvement, the asphalt plant, they are also a source. There are new international rules coming on ship emissions. There are ship lines that are converting to natural gas instead of the heavy bunker diesel they use. There's things happening that are all probably pretty good, but it's something to get educated on as you build your own program to reduce risk in this area. So finally, if we go to the next slide, it's been spoken about in terms of emergency response. EPA is part of the emergency response framework for New England. If there was a major event which caused a very large spill, you can be sure the Coast Guard and EPA will be mobilizing contractors to do cleanup. But I think we have to be aware that the kinds of risks that are present on Fields Point are substantial with the storm risk that Julian pointed out. We're just starting to learn this now with the storm tools risk and what kind of surge could come over the point, come over the land there. And there needs to be some thinking about resilience and whether we want to get those products out of those tanks in the event there's some kind of risk or forecasted risk, like you're talking about. To give you an example of that kind of planning, the Narragansett Bay Commission actually closes the valves so sewage stops coming to the Bay Commission when there's a big storm risk. Because if they didn't and water came over the site in a surge, the whole thing would work backwards. Literally, when you flushed your toilet, it wouldn't go down, it'd come back up. That's a very serious health risk when you think about it. For all of Providence, that's a big risk. So they have valves that will deter the sewage from coming down to the port and actually just go where it could go, into the bay and different sources. Now that's a terrible outcome, but it's a lot better than what could happen. And that kind of thinking around all that's on the port is probably something emergency response planners would want to see. And are we where we need to be? I would tell you EPA would love to get into that conversation because whatever is spilled would then have to be cleaned up. And that's what we do for a living. We do a lot of cleanup work. I will tell you the port is cleaner than it's been. There was a big brownfield project done just not too long ago across from the asphalt plant. So it's cleaner than it's been. And some of the underground sources of toxic pollution in Narragansett Bay have been averted. But it's something to pay attention to. We believe resiliency is something all communities need to do. Providence just did a resiliency workshop. It wasn't about Allen's Avenue and the port. It was really about the resiliency of neighborhoods. And I think a resiliency study of the port would be something we would welcome as people go forward. So that's the sort of overview I have about how EPA thinks about a place like the Port of Providence. I will tell you, when it comes to these issues of emergency risk, EPA doesn't have a lot of authority in this area. These are different agencies. You know, one area that we get a lot of pressure about is, for example, not the Port of Providence issue, but over in Massachusetts, the issue of a nuclear power plant. Well, I don't have that authority to assess whether a nuclear power plant is safe or not, nor do I have the same on the tanks and all the other sources there. On the other hand, I think everyone, including those facilities, would want to be as safe as they possibly can be. And I can tell you they're safer now than they were years ago, and I think they're working on safety as we speak. To speak to the comment, to the speaker who went before me, at Save the Bay, we practiced shelter in place related to the issues on the Univar facility and the issue of chlorine and ammonia. So we understand those risks, or I understand them pretty well. I think there's important ways to think about those lines of communication, working together, building capability and interest, and in the long run, ask the question about what that area is headed to be. Because we all know it's about land use planning and zoning and what kind of future should, especially the area that's outside the formal Port of Providence, actually have. I'm going to stop there because I'll get in trouble if I go any further. It's not my job in my current job to be opining on that. But in my former job, I had a little more latitude, so I'll leave it at that. But you can, it's always important as you think about an area and as you want to build a community capability to address risks, either catastrophic risks or health risks or all the risks, to look at the land use planning for an area so it can influence the future as much as you try to deal with the current situation. So I close with that. Are we done? No, one more speaker, right?
Yes.
Yep.